Okay, welcome to the seventh video in a series of videos on terminology and notation in vibrational astrology. In this video, we have three things we're going to do. Number one, we're going to interpret this 17 vibration planetary configuration in my chart. Number two, we're going to learn about power patterns. We can call them power patterns or power configurations, and spreading patterns, or you can call them spreading configurations. Power patterns and spreading patterns as well. Very simple, it's just a term we have for them, and very important and helpful terminology. But first, what does this huge supersymmetry pattern mean? Let's see, on the right side we have, it lists the midpoint structures 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a 6 midpoint supersymmetry pattern. And there are 8 planets involved if you count the number of planets. So, if you don't know the number of planets and you know just the number of midpoint structures, then that's okay. It still communicates fairly clearly what's going on. If you say I have a 6 midpoint supersymmetry pattern, remember midpoint in this context actually means midpoint structure. We left the term structure out just to keep the terminology a little shorter. So it's a 6 midpoint supersymmetry pattern. What does it mean? So here's the interpretation. This is in 17 vibe. So it has to do with stories of other people. Interest in stories of other people. Interest in stories outside of the stories and the themes that you grew up with. And let's start off with one of the strongest midpoint structures. We have Neptune at Mercury, Mars midpoint 14 minutes. Jupiter is at Uranus, Pluto midpoint 13 minutes. And next one is Mercury at Venus, Mars 37 minutes. Which one of these three midpoints is it best to start with? There's one that's the best to start with. It's not a trick question. There is one that is the best one. Is it Neptune at Mercury, Mars 14 minutes, Jupiter at Uranus, Pluto midpoint 13 minutes, or Mercury at Venus, Mars 37 minutes? Which one? We want to start with Neptune at the Mercury, Mars midpoint 14 minutes. Why not Jupiter at Uranus, Pluto midpoint 13 minutes? Because these are all outer planets. Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto. Neptune at Mercury, Mars has at least one inner planet, happens to have two. We only need to have one to be more important than outer planets only. When you have a planet that's an inner planet, by inner in this context, inner can mean different things depending on context, but in the context of VA, when we say inner planet, we usually mean Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars. Those 5 planets, of course we call Sun and Moon planets, but they're astronomically not planets, but those 5 planets have a more personal, well, Sun and Moon are just so powerfully important, affecting so much of our lives, and Mercury and Venus, Mars have such specific personal impact. Jupiter and Saturn are more broader, less personal, and Uranus, Neptune, Pluto even more so. So if you have an inner planet involved, it really makes it very personal to the person and brings it into their direct personal experience. So the difference between a 14-minute orb and a 13-minute orb is essentially negligible. So this is the most important midpoint structure. We want to start our interpretation with the most important midpoint structures. Here it's clear, Neptune at Mercury, Mars. Because the strongest midpoint structure has the strongest impact. Remember that in vibrational astrology, we think of this as a wiring diagram. It's not just a symbolic language that you can manipulate according to however the symbolism inspires you. It's an actual wiring diagram, and we need to analyze it for what it is. What you see is what you get, and what we see is Neptune and Mercury, Mars, really by far the most important midpoint structure, by far. So, because Mercury, Venus, Mars has a 37-minute orb. The difference between a 14-minute orb and a 37-minute orb is pretty dramatic. When you get under 15 minutes, whoa, it is just crystal clear strong. So the interpretation depends on all of these details. It's not just some sweeping generalization. All of these details work into how it operates for this specific person. That's why everyone's so different. Maybe if someone's born 10 minutes later, they might have a similar configuration, but the orbs have changed, the emphasis has changed, and the interpretation becomes considerably modified. Okay, Neptune at Mercury, Mars. What does it mean? Neptune in VA is not spaced out in psychic, etc. It can be spaced out. It can be psychic. Usually it's not. Neptune is a sense of magic that we get because something is so totally awesome. So what we get here, we could put this together. Mercury, Mars means a desire to understand clearly and apply the ideas. Do something with your ideas. So to do something with your ideas that feels like magic. Mercury, Mars I often call the engineer. You know, an engineer is a person who applies the idea, takes the theory and makes a car or a mobile phone or something out of it. You do. The information is useful. You apply it. It's alive. It lives with us. It's not just theory and abstraction. So Mercury, Mars is not interested in ideas because they're so wonderfully abstract, and theoretical. It's the ideas are used. Tools, ideas, you apply its application. Neptune is this sense of wonder and magic about it. And all of this is serving 17 vibration. It has something to do with the stories of other people. Also, another thing about 17 vibration is, we talked about recently in a video, is the alter ego. The ability to move your personality into other personalities is a good way to think about 17 vibration. To reconfigure your personality to be a different one. What does an actor do? Takes on the personality of someone else. Actors and actresses so often have 17 vibration. People who live two different lives, a public facade and a personal life that are different, often 17 vibration. Not so much because of facade, but because of the ability to move into a different personality, configure yourself in a different way. So that also performers, the rock musician or the folk music person who really moves people. Something about this person's voice that seems so sincere, so real. They take you on this musical ride. 17 vibration gives the ability to do this. There are other things that can give a similar effect, but this is what 17 vibe does. So when you really think about 17 vibe as this kind of fluid personality that moves into the different storylines, different configurations, different even from what it was born with. What do we have? It's a fascination with learning how different people develop the stories and themes of their lives. Can you feel that? Neptune at Mercury, Mars. With Neptune, it's a fascination with how do people develop these stories? What are these themes? Where are they? And it's an ability to identify with these different stories and embody them. 17 vibration. So it's a love of learning what the stories are. This fueled an interest in anthropology. And my first major in college, it was psychology. I took a lot of anthropology classes. What constructs the personality? I always read a lot of literature. I started off more in those fields. And then in my mid-20s, actually around age 23, I started shifting over more to a fascination with mathematics and science. But this was actually my stronger orientation in my early life. Also, when I took the SAT test to go to college, I actually scored higher on verbal than math. So a lot of in the world of astrology, I'm looked at as kind of a numbers nerd, but among numbers nerds, I'm looked at as being having this facility with words and imagination. But more specifically, it gets even more interesting than that. The ability to take on different personalities because of the huge configuration, realizing Neptune and Mercury Mars is just one major focus of it, to appreciate the magic in those different storylines, the beauty of them, which we're going to see more with the Mercury at Venus Mars midpoint structure, which is also strong, and how they can be brought into tangible expression. Venus Mars means something's beautiful, and again, Mars is about doing, making, applying it, experiencing it. Venus Mars is very visceral, very alive. So we're getting Mercury Mars in two of the strong configurations, Neptune at Mercury Mars, Mercury at Venus Mars. Just this part of it, which is very strong, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Neptune, all brought together. And then our third big one, and it's very, very important. It's really not that much weaker than Neptune at Mercury, Mars. It's just outer planets. It's still strong because of how exact it is. What does it do? Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto is like mad, crazy enthusiasm. Compulsive Jupiter, Uranus. Compulsive is Pluto. Jupiter, Uranus is enthusiastic. So what you get is this fascination with the storylines and an enthusiastic embracing of them. So what do we expect? We expect the person to be dramatic, flexible, ability to impersonate and express different styles. This is a fluid and flexible personality that can be entertaining, also energizing and enthusiastic. So that's one of the things I do. I mean, just the way I'm talking right now, this tendency I have to like laugh at times and charge things up, get people excited. I remember when I was in graduate school, we had a class where each of us gave a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, and people joked afterwards that we could call our department the church of research methodology, or they, because I tend to have this dramatic flair. Now, I'm not saying it's the most wonderful, exciting thing in the world, or that you love it, or that it's that conspicuous, but it's there. It's there. It's not like a dry, rote kind of approach. And the joy of experiencing these different things, and the fact that I, will impersonate or imitate, when I put on the Southern drawl or whatever to get across a point. So, you've experienced that if you've listened to enough of my videos and so on. So, and if you know me personally, I do that quite a lot. And also I play a little guitar and take on different personalities. Fluid, enthusiastic kind of person, interested in these things. Where does it come from? If you look at my birth chart, well, let me bring it up real quickly. Let's see here. There's my birth chart. Some people, with Saturn in Leo, in this house system, it's in the 6th house. Whole sign house, it's in the 5th house. Saturn square Mercury. Mercury's in the sign of Taurus. I've had people look at my chart and say, if they don't know me at all, if they just met me, they'll say, wow, you might be a little bit inhibited and have problems in expressing yourself. Mercury square Saturn in fixed signs, and then the Aries rising, you end up in arguments and whatever. Well, I don't know. Maybe that, is true for everybody in some sense, but it doesn't pick up on the more obvious thing and the important thing, because what we do in vibrational astrology is we are not making a picture of you, like a photograph or a painting, like who can make the most accurate painting. What we're doing is we're finding energy dynamics that you can become aware of to use to be more successful in your life, be more fulfilling, and have a better understanding of what's going on. That's what we're doing. And that might sound like semantics, but it's different, because what's happening here is that we can look at this configuration and this 17 vibration configuration. Hold on a second. Let me get rid of this so we're not confused. Okay, there we go. We can look at this 17 vibration configuration, and if we were talking to me as a client, we can say, you've got this fluidity, this ability to, you could be good at performing, acting to some extent. You can really get people excited. Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto, and that would say, maybe you should do those videos. It's not just the information, but the way you deliver it, and develop enthusiasm and the experience of these different worlds and dealing with the astrology, each person in their own unique story, the variety, the richness. It's a form of theater, of literature, of experience, all having this. Then you can look at the other midpoint structures and say Mars at Mercury, Uranus. In my birth chart, if we go back to my birth chart, I have a similar configuration. I'll show you in my midpoints. Oh, this went off your screen a little bit. Let me pull this down. Sorry, I didn't prepare this as part of the lecture, but we just pull this in here. If you look at my midpoints in my natal chart, I just happen to know this because it's my chart. I have Mercury conjunct Mars Uranus midpoint in my natal chart, 36 minutes. So that's, talking fast, rapid work, Mercury, Mars, apply it, etc. We could see what vibration it's in. If there's a vibration, get more information. But why I'm mentioning that now is that in the 17 vibration, one of the things that's important is Mars at Mercury, Uranus, same three planets I have in my natal chart in a midpoint structure. The focal planet here is Mars instead of Mercury. But when you have a midpoint structure with the same three planets, they're very similar. So the Mars at Mercury, Uranus is taking that quickness, that an application of ideas and getting things done now, the impatience of Mars, Uranus, this dynamic energy, and applying it within the context of this fluidity, and help charging the interest in things like vibrational astrology, and software development, and moving things rapidly and experiencing them. And then the others are weaker. Venus at Saturn, Uranus at Jupiter, Saturn. Yeah, I don't even usually get into that very much because they're so weak. It's just, what does these weak ones really do is add the flavor of the planets. It's adding a little more Venus. It's got Saturn, Uranus in both of them. Venus at Saturn, Uranus at Jupiter, Saturn. So it's adding this bit of rebelliousness, this little bit of offbeat approach to it all. Not being comfortable with the status quo in this whole thing, getting a different approach, breaking some new ground, a disruptive approach, and VA is disruptive. And often my disruptive approach, I don't always have everything prepared, and I don't always say things in the most politically correct way, etc. Excuse me. There's some disruption that will happen, but the Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto, much stronger, and that vibrancy and enthusiasm probably helps me get away with some of that. It adds a little tone to it. You don't want to get lost in the trees and miss the forest. The main point is, this is what I do. This is a part of my life. Is I can add enthusiasm, vibrancy. I can identify with different storylines. Some of my closest friends and people I feel identified with are in other countries, in Turkey and Serbia, etc. I go there once and this is home. This is a 17 vibe way of life. You find something that makes a connection with you, whether you've had experience with it or not. in the past. Okay, that's the interpretation. Now, let's look at power configurations and spreading configurations. First, power. What is a power pattern? We use this term a lot. Power means conjunction. When there's a conjunction, and it adds, because of that conjunction, it's adding another planet to the configuration, a quick way to identify that is just to call it a power configuration. So what pattern do we have in Buddy Holly's natal chart? We see Jupiter opposition Moon, and both of them are square. Well, it's both of them are square to the Sun. The Moon is out of orb. Using the orb we have in vibrational astrology, it's out of orb to Neptune. So what do we have here? It's not showing that line to Neptune, at least according to the orbs that are used here. Oh yeah, square. Square is 4-degree orb. I got lost for a minute. I was thinking of the orb for trine. Square for an orb is 4 degrees. So 11 degrees 59 minutes brings us to 15 degrees 59 minutes. Moon Neptune is out of orb. So only the Sun, Moon, and Jupiter are within orb. Let's leave Neptune out of this because it's not in orb square to the Moon. But so therefore, Sun, Moon, and Jupiter are all aspected to each other. Sun is square both Moon and Jupiter, and Moon is opposition Jupiter. Remember that in vibrational astrology, orbs are taken very seriously. It's not some sloppy thing like you might say, oh, well, it's out of orb, but it's still there. No, we don't say that in vibrational astrology. Let me say that again because it's a good example, because people say that kind of thing. They say, well, it's out of orb, man, but, it's still there. Wait a minute. You just contradicted yourself, bro. You don't, it's not out of orb and still there. That, I understand. That's fine for many kinds of astrology. It is not fine with vibrational astrology because when you start getting sloppy like that, you can make sense of anything and you will project on it. And we have pretty strict criteria, and that strict criteria is why we've been able to advance, because we admit that things don't work. We admit that things are out of orb. We don't smooth it over in VA. We want to test and see if it really works. So using VA, it's strict. Moon is not square Neptune, period. The orb is so weak that it's just, that 4-degree orb is going to catch anything that's you can really sense. It's just too weak to really sense it. Okay, bottom line, you have a Sun, Moon, Jupiter. What would you call it? It's a T-square. Now, if you, let's read what we say here. In singer-songwriter Buddy Holly's natal chart, there's a T-square, which is a square-square opposition pattern. Because Sun is conjunct Neptune, there are 4 planets. Okay, well, if you wanted, let's say you used a bigger orb. Let's say we use a 6-degree orb for squares. Then it's all within orb. Only with a larger orb, you would have 4 planets. So let's say we're using a bigger orb than we use in VA. We use a 6-degree orb for squares. Okay, fine. Then we have a Sun, Neptune, Moon, Jupiter. With that conjunction involved, we call it a power configuration. So the fast way to say this, you could say, he has a T-square, and one of the points in the T-square is actually a conjunction, and whoa, you've had to describe this whole thing. It's nice to have a label for this, and we call it power. So we call it a power T-square. It's a power T-square. If we had a bigger orb, Actually, in VA, it's not a power T-square because that moon Neptune's out of orb. But if we use big little orbs, it would be a power T-square. So just to add the word power, if there's one or more conjunctions, we call it power because it's powered up by another planet. Instead of a 3-planet T-square, it's a 4-planet T-square. So power here refers to the additional power from the conjunction. Okay, how would you describe this? This is my 43rd vibration chart. How would you describe this? What do you see? It's nice to be able to look at it and describe it very quickly. I'm referring to the trine. And, well, let's do this. How would you describe the trine and sextile? Now, there are a few ways to describe this. How would you describe the trine? How would you describe the sextile? And could you describe the whole thing, the trine and the sextile? You can think about it. I'll count to 5. What's a nice, simple way to... Actually, you don't need fancy terminology for the trine and sextile. So how would you describe it? You could pause this if you want to. And I will continue. 1, 2, 3. Next slide. You don't need fancy terminology. You can just say Mars is trine the triple conjunction. Triple. Use that word triple. It really helps. I mean, you could say Mars is trine the 3 planets, what are blah, 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 blah. So we use words like triple, quadruple, etc. So, you know, if you get above, quadruple, or sometimes people say quintuple, you almost never have 5 planets within orb anyway, so that doesn't come up much. So what you have here is Mars is trine the triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, and Pluto. That's a nice way to describe it. Mars is trine the triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, and Pluto. So with practice and with some thinking about it, you can come up with very short and clear ways to describe things. After I say it, it's obvious, but you have to think of it. And similarly with the sextile, you could say Sun is sextile, the triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, Pluto. You could also give some indication of how strong these things are. The Mars trine has about a little bit less than 2-degree orb. I sometimes use the word solid for that. Mars makes a solid trine to the triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, and Pluto. I wouldn't call that strong. It's certainly not weak. It's solid. So that's a word we sometimes use. Let's see what we have here. Some people like to always include the word power to denote that conjunctions are involved. Right. So call it a power trine aspect. You can do that. You can call it a power trine aspect. I think in this case we don't really need the word power. For the T-square, it really helps. But if you want, you could call it a power trine aspect of Mars to the triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, Pluto. That word power does make it even clearer, reinforces the fact that we're talking about conjunction, one or more planets conjunct, that's adding to something that normally would just be much simpler. So instead of this just being a simple trine between 2 planets, it's a power trine. So that's optional. I think it's helpful because it starts right off when you say power trine. As soon as you say that, power trine means a planet is conjunct 2 other planets that are conjunct, and it might be more than one conjunction. It might be a triple conjunction. It might be 2 planets conjunct that are trine, another 2 planets that are conjunct. But at least you know there are conjunctions strengthening it. So a power trine aspect of Mars to the triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, and Pluto is extremely clear and straightforward. It doesn't have the person listening or reading what you're saying having to think about it a lot. What are you saying? What's going on in the chart? So having nice terminology where we can communicate quickly and easily is helpful. So adding the word power is one more word, slightly more verbose. I happen to like it. And we could say Sun is sextile the triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, and Pluto. We can also say the Sun is is in a triple sextile, is making a triple sextile to a power. Sorry, I'm getting punchy here. The Sun is making a power sextile to the triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, and Pluto. Helps. Now, there's also a way to describe the 5-planet configuration. There's a way to describe the Sun, Mars, Mercury, and Jupiter and Pluto, the 5 planets. I'll count to 5, let you think about it. What is it? Well, you wouldn't know if you haven't studied this yet, but if you've been learning VA for some time, you would know that this is a spreading pattern. So we can call this a spreading sextile-sextile-trine. Actually, that's not a very good description, because if we call it a spreading sextile-sextile-trine, that implies there are 3 planets, but we have a triple conjunction, so we can call it a spreading power sextile-sextile-trine. Spreading means one of the aspects is out of orb. One of the aspects is out of orb. And if you have a conjunction and the aspect of both planets in the conjunction is missing, it's still spreading. One of the lines, here's the way to look at it, one of the lines that would connect all 3 points in the zodiac is missing. It should be a trine sextile-sextile, but the Sun-Mars sextile is way out of orb. Sun's at 7, Mars is at 10, not even close, but it's still spreading. So we have a spreading sextile-sextile-trine. More specifically, we have a power sextile-sextile-trine. And more specific than that, to really describe it well, it's a spreading power sextile-sextile-trine with a triple conjunction of Mercury, Jupiter, Pluto. That conveys clearly what's going on. So this configuration is both a power configuration, because it's got the conjunction, in fact, it's got the triple conjunction, and it's spreading. One of the aspects is out of orb. So it's a spreading power, sextile-sextile-trine. So power and spreading are used all the time for any kind of configuration. Now, excuse me, notice that we do not have a special label for sextile-sextile-trine. It does have special label in some other systems of astrology. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here and put the rest of what we're going to discuss about labels and how we limit the number of labels we have in VA and why we do it. Let's discuss some of these additional things in the next video in the series, because we're at getting up on 34 minutes. I'd like to keep these to about a half hour. So let's cover that in the next lesson. So what we've covered here, to summarize before we end, is you now know what a power configuration is. A power configuration occurs whenever there's one or more conjunctions. You can have a power grand trine, power T-square. Power, almost anything, means a conjunction has gotten into it. You can have a power isotrap, a power midpoint isotrap. It means that one or more conjunctions have added to the configuration. So if I say there's a power isotrap, it means it's an isotrap, but instead of 5 planets, instead of 4 planets with the isotrap, there are 5 because of the conjunction. Or if I say there's a power midpoint isotrap, you can immediately visualize what's going on. A midpoint isotrap is a 5-planet configuration, a planet making 2 midpoint structures, but at one of those 5 points, there is a conjunction. at least one conjunction going on. At least two planets conjunct each other, if not more. So it helps. This word power is very handy to let the person know that one or more planets have added to it. And then once you say the word power, it's a power midpoint isotrap. Then the person listening or reading what you're saying can immediately begin to think, what's the power? You know, it's a power, and then you could explain the details of it. That maybe there are two planets with conjunctions. And the word spreading we use all the time as well. Because very often you have a T-square, you have any number of things. We're going to give some more examples in the next video. We're going to cover some more kinds of variations of things. The next video in this series, we'll see cases where the word spreading is very, very helpful. So spreading in power, and the other thing we did in this video was do some interpretation, which is always fun. Okay, we are at 36 minutes. We'll stop here and continue with what will be the 8th video in this series in the next video. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.